Today we will be beginning Chapter 3, Lesson 1. Now this entire unit, Chapters 3 through 6, focus on ecology, and we will spend the remainder of the semester in this unit. So something to think about as we start this lesson. How is Earth, in a scientific sense, a living planet? Now what we mean by that, the entire planet. How do we classify it as living? Can we divide parts of it into non-living parts? Are there some things that maybe could be categorized as both? So studying our living planet, this is called the biosphere. Now the biosphere contains all life on Earth and all parts on the Earth in which life exists. So this is land, water, and the atmosphere. So people ask me all the time, well, how the atmosphere? Well, we have things that fly and live in the atmosphere. We can have bacteria that can be blown into the air as well. When you sneeze, that's what you're doing. You are projecting bacteria into the air every time you sneeze. So the biosphere extends from about 8 kilometers above Earth's surface to as far as 11 kilometers below Earth's surface. Now, ecology, what it actually is, it's a scientific study of interactions among and between organisms and their physical environment. Now, what does that mean in normal terms? It's how living things interact with other living things and the non-living things around them. So interactions within the biosphere produce a web of what's called interdependence between organisms and the environments in which they live. Now, what we see right here in this figure, this is what's called a food web. Now, it shows how every organism here is connected to every other organism. And food webs are made up of several food chains, which we will talk about later in this chapter. Now, organisms respond to their environments, and because of this, they can change their environments as well. Now, when you think about humans and how we are changing our environments, the first thing that should come to mind is global warming and how we have accelerated that through the burning of fossil fuels. So ecology and economics, how are they connected? Well, to start with, they share the same word root. Okay, so human economics and ecology are linked. Okay, we live within the biosphere. Here in the Bible Belt of Alabama, we have a huge interdependence on ecology because our primary industry is agriculture and its related processes. So we need to focus on the levels of ecological organization. Now, we start way down at the bottom with the individual organism. That's us. That's your pet dog or your pet cat or your pet frog or turtle or your ant. That is an individual organism. Now, once we start taking all the individuals that belong to the same species that live in the same area, that is a population. When we start taking different populations, these are different species that live together in a defined area, we call this a community. Okay, and then once we take several communities and put them together, we form what's called an ecosystem. This is all the organisms that live in a place together with their physical environment. So it is only at the ecosystem level that we begin including the non-living things as well. Okay. Now, once we take several several ecosystems and put them together, we create what is called a biome. Now, depending upon who you ask, there are 10 to 12 biomes found throughout Earth. We have a lesson that focuses on them later in this chapter. Okay, and then ultimately we end up at the biosphere. This is our entire planet with all living things and the non-living things as well. So, when we talk about living things, the actual term for these are biotic factors. Okay, it's any living part of an environment. Okay, includes plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria. Okay, so we see this example here. Biotic factors relating to a bullfrog might include the algae it eats, crickets, worms. Even the animals that eat the bullfrog, things like that. Now, the abiotic factors, things like water, sunlight, heat, precipitation, humidity, wind, soil type, all of that. Okay, so how a bullfrog might be affected by abiotic factors. If it gets too hot, a frog can actually dehydrate and die, just like we can. Okay, but usually when we look at it in terms of ecology, we see how those two things interact. So the difference between the two is not always clear. Abiotic factors can be influenced by biotic factors and vice versa. Okay, so you can also see here that essentially the dynamic mix of these two shapes every environment. So if you have a pond, if it's an exceptionally hot summer, as we've had as of late, and fall as well, then you can have the water level drop. Okay, when that occurs, it creates less of an environment for all the living things there, and they have to struggle more to survive. All right, so the ways that we study ecology. Well, the first one we have is observation. So we quite literally go out into the field and we look for things to study. Okay, so it's often the first step in making ecological or in asking ecological questions. Now, once we do this, we experiment. So experiments can be used to test our hypothesis. So we may set up several artificial environments in a laboratory, greenhouse, things like that, and then carefully alter conditions in selected parts of natural ecosystems. And then finally, modeling. Now, the most important reason for ecological modeling is so that ultimately we can try and find what happens in one place and see if it is repeatable, meaning can we see what happens in one place will happen in another place under the same conditions. Most of the time, we find it does, in fact, happen that way. If you have any questions, post them in the comment section below, or you can email me at mr.tucker.schs@gmail.com.